The Exorcism of Anneliese Michel. It began on a cold, drizzling evening in October. The village was draped in a shroud of mist that seemed to muffle sounds and blur the outlines of the ancient stone houses. In the heart of this village stood a modest home, where the Michel family lived. Their life was unremarkable, steeped in the routine of country folk, until their eldest daughter, Anneliese, began to show signs of a strange affliction. From my vantage point, the first changes were subtle. Anneliese, a bright and vivacious 19-year-old, began to withdraw into herself. Her laughter, once the music of the Michel household, became a rare sound. At night, the floorboards creaked under the weight of her restless pacing. Her parents attributed these changes to the pressures of her university studies, but I knew it was the beginning of something dark, something that festered beneath the surface. The true horror began one evening at dinner. The family sat around the table, a prayer of thanks just uttered, when Anneliese's eyes rolled back, leaving only the whites visible. A guttural growl escaped her lips, her voice distorted into something unrecognizable. Plates and glasses on the table rattled, as though an unseen force shook them violently. Her mother gasped, reaching out to her, but Anneliese recoiled with such force that her chair toppled backward, slamming her onto the ground. From then on, the incidents grew more frequent and violent. Anneliese spoke in tongues, her voice cycling through timbres and pitches that no human throat should achieve. She exhibited strength that belied her frail frame, often tearing at her clothes or hurling objects with alarming force. Dark bruises appeared on her body, as if unseen hands mauled her in the night. The local priest, Father Renz, visited often, his face growing graver with each encounter. The decision to conduct an exorcism did not come easily. Anneliese's mother found her one morning, crouched in the corner of her room, whispering in a frenzy. She was reciting names of demons from ancient texts. It was then that they realized this was no ordinary sickness. Father Renz, a skeptic of possession, found himself reaching for his worn copy of the Ritual Romanum, the fear in his eyes betraying his calm exterior. The first session of the exorcism was set on a night where the wind howled like the cries of the damned. Anneliese, bound lightly to her bed to prevent harm, thrashed violently as Father Renz began the prayers. The room grew unnaturally cold, breaths turning to mist. As the Latin words sliced through the air, Anneliese's body arched, a scream tearing from her lips, a scream that seemed not to come from one, but a multitude. In that scream, I heard the echoes of ancient evils, names that should have been long forgotten whispered in the dark corners of the world. The small room felt crowded, as if specters of the past had congregated there, drawn by the battle of wills between the human spirit and the unearthly intruders. Father Renz continued, his voice unwavering despite the sweat that drenched his brow. Anneliese's eyes, black and depthless, fixed on him with a malevolence that was palpable. The lights flickered, shadows dancing on the walls, contorting into grotesque shapes. Just as the tension became almost unbearable, there was a sharp crack. The crucifix on the wall had splintered, its pieces clattering to the floor. The room fell silent, the only sound Anneliese's ragged breathing. Father Renz, pale and shaken, muttered a final prayer before retreating to the safety of the church to regroup. He left behind a family clinging to each other, terror etched into their faces, and a young woman whose eyes flickered with a hint of something sinister, knowing, and not entirely gone. As the night pressed on, the village enveloped in darkness and the whispers of the trees, it became clear that this was only the beginning. The battle for Anneliese's soul was far from over, and the true depth of the nightmare had yet to reveal itself. The days following the first exorcism were shrouded in a tense, suffocating silence. Anneliese seemed to be in a constant daze, her eyes often fixed on something unseen, whispering under her breath in a language that no one around her could understand. The air in the Michel household felt thick, charged with a foreboding stillness, as if the very walls were holding their breath, waiting for the storm to break. Father Renz, determined yet deeply shaken by the events of that night, spent long hours in the sanctuary of the church, poring over ancient texts and correspondences with other clergy who had faced similar afflictions. He was looking for a clue, anything that might give him an edge in what he now accepted was a battle against a deeply entrenched demonic presence. His skepticism had been replaced by a fervent resolve, but the shadow of doubt lingered, the fear that he was outmatched. Meanwhile, the village buzzed with whispered rumors. News of Anneliese's condition spread like wildfire, drawing curiosity and fear in equal measure. Some believed the family was cursed. Others speculated about sins committed that brought this plague upon the Michels. Superstition mingled with concern, creating a miasma of gossip that swirled around the edges of the town like the ever-present fog. On the third night, as the clock chimed 3, the witching hour, Anneliese's behavior escalated horrifyingly. Her family, keeping vigil in shifts, watched in horror as she suddenly started convulsing. Her back arched impossibly, her screams piercing the night. She spoke of torments and fires, of landscapes drenched in blood and skies that rained ash. It was as though she glimpsed hell itself through veiled eyes. During one such episode, she turned her gaze directly on her younger sister, Maria, who had crept downstairs upon hearing the commotion. With a voice that was not her own, Anneliese spoke, "Maria, come closer. They want to meet you." Her words were like ice, and the room temperature plummeted, a visible frost forming on the window panes. Father Renz was called immediately. Arriving with a small, weathered suitcase of his holy artifacts, his entrance was met with a gust of wind that slammed the door shut behind him. The candles flickered as he set up his makeshift altar, placing a crucifix and a Bible beside the bed where Anneliese lay, now thrashing less but muttering incessantly. This second session was more intense. Father Renz's chants were met with violent reactions. Anneliese clawed at her restraints, her eyes rolling back as she issued threats and prophecies. At one point, she laughed, a chilling, hollow sound that echoed off the walls, sending shivers down everyone's spine. "You cannot save her," she taunted between verses of an eerie lullaby that she could not have known. As the night wore on, Father Renz sensed a shift. The oppressive energy in the room seemed to pulsate, converging on Anneliese. He pressed his advantage, reciting the rite with renewed vigor. Suddenly, Anneliese stopped struggling. A profound silence enveloped the room, broken minutes later by her weak, trembling voice. "Please, help me," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. For a moment, it seemed the Anneliese they knew had returned. But the relief was short-lived. As Father Renz approached to offer comfort, the room grew icy, and a shadow seemed to pass through the walls. Anneliese's demeanor changed once more. Her face contorted in a silent scream, and without warning, she spoke in a deep, demonic tone, revealing secrets about Father Renz that she couldn't possibly know. His darkest fears, his doubts, his past errors, all laid bare before the Michels' horrified eyes. The session ended with dawn breaking over the horizon, the first light casting long shadows across the room. Anneliese lay exhausted, her breath shallow and ragged. The family and Father Renz, surrounded by tattered pages and scattered holy items, realized then that their ordeal was far from over. They were in the grip of something ancient and evil, and it was not going to relinquish Anneliese without a profound fight. The village woke to another day, unaware of the terrors that night had held. But within the walls of the Michel home, the battle lines were redrawn, the stakes now terrifyingly clear. The strain of the relentless supernatural assaults began to fracture the once unshakable faith of the Michel family. Sleepless nights blurred into shadowy days, each moment stretching taut with the anticipation of dread. The house, a place of past laughter and warmth, now seemed to groan under the weight of a suffocating, unseen presence. Anneliese's condition oscillated between moments of lucid despair and terrifying episodes of possession. During her clearer moments, she begged her family to continue the fight, to free her from the clutches of the entities that claimed her spirit. "Don't let me go," she would whisper, her voice so frail it seemed as though her very life force was being siphoned away. Father Renz, bearing the burden of his own shaken convictions, sought counsel from an old mentor, Father Lucas, a seasoned exorcist whose experiences with the demonic were vast. Over a crackling phone line, Father Lucas advised, "You must find the demon's name. It's the key to their undoing." Armed with this new purpose, Father Renz prepared for the next confrontation, his resolve hardened by the gravity of his task. The village, once merely curious, now turned wary, the Michel home becoming a beacon of morbid fascination. The local bishop, concerned by the growing attention, cautioned Father Renz to tread carefully, warning of the church's precarious reputation. But the urgency of Anneliese's plight left no room for hesitation. The fight for Anneliese's soul transcended ecclesiastical politics and personal safety. It was a testament to his faith, a battle he could not forsake. As the third exorcism commenced, a storm brewed, the wind howling like the cries of the damned, echoing the turmoil inside the Michel household. The room was arranged as a sanctum, with every available holy artifact surrounding Anneliese, who was restrained more for her protection than anything else. Father Renz began with the Litany of Saints, a plea for the heavenly host to lend their strength. Anneliese wreathed and spat, her voice a cacophony of guttural sounds and piercing shrieks. Each invocation seemed to torment her, as if the names of the saints burned her very soul. Then, without warning, the atmosphere shifted. A deep, ominous silence fell over the room. Anneliese stopped moving, her body rigid, her eyes fixed on Father Renz. In a voice not her own, deep and resonant, she spoke, "Do you really wish to know my name?" The question hung in the air, charged with malevolent promise. Father Renz steadied his trembling hands, focusing on the crucifix clutched in his grasp. "Reveal yourself," he commanded, his voice stronger than he felt. The room temperature plummeted, breaths visible in the icy air as Anneliese began to laugh, a sound so unsettling it seemed to crawl under the skin. "I am the one who gnaws at her fears, who feasts on her despair. I am Belial," the voice declared, each word dripping with venom. Father Renz, recognizing the name from law as one of deceit and worthlessness, pressed on, using the demon's name as a weapon, binding it with his prayers. The ritual grew in intensity, pages of the Bible turning as if caught in a gust of wind, candles flickering madly. Anneliese, or Belial, thrashed against the restraints, the air thick with the stench of sulfur. Father Renz, drenched in sweat and exhaustion, continued the rite, his voice echoing through the tumult. Suddenly, a sharp crack resounded as the window shattered, the wind bursting in, scattering the protective circle of salt. Anneliese's scream morphed into a howl of rage and pain, the demon fighting back with renewed fury. As dawn approached, the storm outside abated, and so did the entity's resistance. Anneliese collapsed, unconscious but alive. Father Renz slumped beside her bed, his prayers a whispered benediction in the newfound quiet. The night's battle had ended, but the war was far from over. Each victory seemed only to bring the darkness closer, its shadow lingering longer, its touch colder. As the Michel family gathered, their faces drawn and weary, they understood that the path to salvation was fraught with more peril than they had ever imagined. The ordeal had taken its toll on Anneliese, leaving her a shadow of her former self. Each exorcism session seemed to draw more strength from her than it did from the demonic entities that claimed her. Her moments of lucidity were punctuated by whispers of despair, each word a testament to the agony she endured. Her family watched, helpless and horrified, as the vibrant young woman they knew was eroded by an unseen malevolence. Father Renz, haunted by the encounters, felt the weight of his responsibilities more acutely than ever. His nights were filled with research and prayer, his days with anxious preparations for the confrontations that awaited. The advice from Father Lucas had provided a temporary edge, but it was clear that Belial was not the only spirit tormenting Anneliese. The demon's mention of "we" hinted at a legion hidden within her, each waiting to emerge and confront their exorcist. As the community's whispers turned into outright avoidance, the Michel home became an island of sorrow in a sea of suspicion. The bishop's warnings had become stern reprimands, but Father Renz could not abandon his charge. The fight for Anneliese's soul transcended ecclesiastical politics and personal safety. It was a testament to his faith, a battle he could not forsake. On the eve of the fourth exorcism, the air felt charged, electric with the tension of impending storm. Father Renz arrived to find the Michel family gathered in solemn prayer, their faces etched with the fatigue of warriors long besieged. Anneliese lay still, her breathing shallow, the dark circles under her eyes like bruises against her pale skin. The ritual began with an intensity that surpassed all previous sessions. Father Renz, fortified by holy water and sacred relics, commenced with a forceful recitation of the exorcism rite. The response was immediate and violent. Anneliese convulsed, her body contorting in unnatural angles, her voice a chorus of chilling laughter and spine-curling screams. Midway through the rite, a deafening silence enveloped the room. Anneliese sat up, her movements rigid and mechanical. Her eyes, once a vivid blue, now mirrored the dark abyss of her torment. She looked directly at Father Renz, her voice calm, chillingly serene. "You think you are saving her, but you are only bringing her closer to us. Every word you speak tightens our grip." Father Renz, his resolve faltering, pushed forward, reciting the rite with a fervor born of desperation. The room grew colder, a visible frost forming on the windows despite the summer heat outside. Anneliese began to speak in tongues, her voice overlapping with others, male and female, each uttering threats and mocking laughter. Then, without warning, the room plunged into darkness, the candles snuffed out by an unseen breath. A cold wind whipped through the space, the shadows seeming to swirl and coalesce. When the lights flickered back on, Anneliese was standing, her restraints torn apart, her eyes gleaming with malice. Father Renz, his heart pounding in his chest, faced her with the crucifix extended. "In the name of Christ, I command you to return to the shadows from whence you came," he shouted over the howling wind. The climax of the ritual was a cacophony of sounds, a thunderous roar, the shattering of glass, and the final, guttural scream from Anneliese. As silence fell, she collapsed to the floor, unconscious but breathing. Father Renz, exhausted and trembling, knew this battle was different. They had pushed back the darkness, but at a great cost. The dawn broke over a weary house, the morning light timidly entering a room scarred by spiritual warfare. The Michel family and Father Renz gathered around Anneliese, their relief mingled with dread. Each victory seemed to promise a more terrifying challenge. As they prepared for what was to come, they knew the final confrontation was imminent. The entities within Anneliese were retreating, but they would not go quietly. The stage was set for a final battle, one that would determine Anneliese's fate and test the very limits of their faith and courage. The days leading up to the final exorcism were filled with a palpable tension that clung to every corner of the Michel household. Anneliese, now mostly silent, stared vacantly through windows that framed a deceptively peaceful landscape. Her moments of clarity were fleeting, and when she did speak, her words were of warnings and pleas, urging her family to end her suffering, one way or another. Father Renz, warm but resolute, knew that the final confrontation would determine more than just Anneliese's fate. It was a culmination of his own spiritual journey, a test of his faith in the face of profound darkness. With the counsel of Father Lucas and other exorcists from around the globe, he had crafted a strategy that he hoped would expel the demons for good. As the night of the final exorcism approached, the village seemed to hold its breath. The local clergy, having been reluctantly drawn into the fray, attended in support, their presence a shield against both the spiritual and communal fallout. The Michel family gathered in the living room, transformed into a sanctuary with every conceivable holy artifact. Anneliese lay in the middle, her eyes closed, her breathing shallow. Candles flickered as shadows danced against the walls, the light struggling against the darkness that seemed eager to encroach. Father Renz began with a solemn procession around Anneliese, sprinkling holy water in a circle, sealing the room from malevolent influences. He then started the rite of exorcism with a powerful invocation of the Archangel Michael, calling upon his strength and protection. As the prayers intensified, so did the atmosphere around Anneliese. The air thickened, a palpable sense of oppression filling the room. Anneliese began to convulse, her body reacting violently to the words of the rite. Her voice, when it came, was a symphony of agony, multiple voices overlapping, each crying out in anger and despair. "You cannot defeat us," the voices screamed, a statement that was both a challenge and a declaration. "We are legion, for we are many," Father Renz, steadfast in his faith, continued, his voice rising over the cacophony. He recited passages from the scriptures, each word a hammer against the walls built by the demons. The family joined in, their voices a chorus of faith, each prayer a strike against the shadows. The climax was sudden and intense. Anneliese arched, a scream tearing from her throat, louder than any human could produce. The windows rattled, the candles snuffed out, plunging the room into darkness. A cold wind circled, and then, as quickly as it had begun, it stopped. Silence fell, heavy and complete. When the candles were relit, Anneliese lay still, her chest rising and falling with deep, even breaths. Father Renz approached cautiously, a final prayer on his lips. As he reached out to touch her forehead, her eyes fluttered open. They were clear, the familiar blue returning, the malice gone. She looked around, confusion giving way to realization, and then, tears. The relief was overwhelming, hugs and tears mingling as the family reunited. Father Renz, his duties fulfilled, stepped back, allowing them their moment. He knew the road to recovery would be long and fraught with challenges, but for now, the darkness had been vanquished. However, as the family celebrated, Father Renz noticed something unsettling. A small, antique mirror on the wall had cracked, a single, jagged line running through its center. As he stared, the reflection shifted, showing not the jubilant scene behind him, but a dark figure, watching, waiting. The battle was won, but the war was far from over.